Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where I want to talk about one of the first upgrades I bought for my PC, and it was a very special card, the Orchid Righteous 3D. This is my original Voodoo 1 card that I bought back in 1997, and after 23 years the card and a few bits are all I have left. The box and the manuals have long been lost. I do have the driver and the sample CDs, but I've somehow managed to misplace them when I last moved, so they're most likely in a safe place. Though thanks to the internet we can actually see what the box and the CDs would have looked like. Apart from the card, the other important part that I do still have is the pass-through cable, as unlike modern graphics cards or even some at the time, this card will only do 3D. It has no ability to do any of the standard PC 2D modes. So that means it can't do CGA, EGA, VGA or SVGA, so you have to have another card that will handle it. In this case I have an ATI Max 64, which is used with the pass-through cable like thus. One end goes into the 2D card, and the other goes into one of the ports on the Voodoo. So when your PC is in 2D mode, the video just gets passed on, but when it's rendering 3D, it cuts that off and just draws directly from the 3D card. Now the Orchid was a little bit unique, as where most cards would just use basic relays to switch between the 2D and the 3D video sources, this card had mechanical relays, which are these large blocks here. The thinking behind it was that if you completely separate the two video sources, then you should have less noise, though there is the possibility these will wear out much quicker than another card. But one of the upshots for me was that I could always tell when this card kicked in, as it made this sound, which was amazing to hear it echoing out of the case that I had back in the day, as it meant the game was going to be using that fancy new graphics card that I just bought. One of the positives of having a separate 3D card was it made it much cheaper for you to buy than getting a combo card, but there were a few cons that we'll see in a bit. Let's jump to the Windows 95 machine, where I already have everything installed. And as we can see with the drivers off the CD, we get a Righteous 3D card in the hardware manager, and a name section in the display properties with just a few options. But with the newer reference drivers, it just shows up as a Voodoo 1 with a far more generic display tab. So let's check out the CDs that came with the card, and when we insert it we get this very 90s menu that you can install various demos from, or you can even run some of the graphics ones directly from the CD. Righteous had 3 revisions of the CDs, and as far as I can tell they came out in 96, 97 and 98. Now I was able to find copies of the first and third, but not the second edition, which is what I got. I have these demos already installed and ready to check out, and here's the 3 demos that came with the version 1 disc. Wiz is the Wizard's Tower, that you get to wander around the various rooms, throw fireballs and then just marvel at the detailed geometry. You can also enable and disable some features, like frame rate. Ooh, look at those high 20s FPS. Turning on wireframe mode, or even turning off texture mapping. And just when you think you've seen it all, you can throw in bats. Lots and lots of bats that really do tank the frame rate. The next demo is a model viewer, but the later releases had more, so we'll check in on that one instead. So finally we get Fight, which had 2 versions, the Glide powered one and the DirectX powered one. Now Glide was the graphics API that was written just for the Voodoo cards, and you could typically tell when a game was using Glide as you would get this animation on startup. DirectX did have some benefits that it could work on more cards, but Glide meant you could use more of the special hardware in the Voodoo and you could optimize it more directly for that card. So if the game had direct support for Glide, you would pick that option every time, else you could use DirectX or OpenGL. The fight demo, as we've been seeing, is a very basic 2-player beat-em-up. There's not even health bars or any combos here, but it does have some nice effects, like the environment mapped Anubis, or the real-time reflections on the floor, which were not easy to do with software rendering, but the 3D cards made them seem effortless. The camera even moves around to give a better view of the stage like Virtua Fighter. The later CDs had more demos, so let's check them out as well. As we've already seen Wizard's Tower, let's jump on to Flipper, or Grand Bleu as it was also known as. Both names work, as you can see it's an underwater demo that shows off some nice warping effects as well as projected lighting. You can jump between the various swimming animals or control the camera directly. Once again you have the options of turning on wireframe, enabling fog, or turning off textures. Now this demo is actually a real Windows application, and we can see the issue of the 3D effects card being full screen only when we try to bring up the tools menu. This forces the card to turn off and lets the 2D card do all the drawing work, so no windowed view of the demo. It then switches back as we click on the main screen. Next up is the model viewer, which we didn't look at last time because there is far more models in here to choose from. And as you might have noticed, there's also an updated logo animation. This is due to updating the drivers, as the newer ones were needed for these demos. And as we can see, the environment mapping is still very nice, as are the, for the time, very high poly counts, which we can see in much more detail if we turn on the wireframe mode. There are far more models this time around, as there's only 2 in the original. On top of that, joystick controls even works this time, so you can actually zoom in and out of the models, which for some reason you can't do with the keyboard. Fight also makes a return, but very little has changed, so let's check out Demo Room instead, which is a lighting demo that shows off real-time lighting effects that are actually very cool. You get to change the type of light, which includes spotlights in various colours, as well as textured lighting, or even a video as the light source. It is a great graphical effect to end the demos on, as it's time to fulfill part of the channel's name and check out some games. I've grabbed 2 off the shelf, one that came with 3D effect support, and the other that required it to be patched in later. Now, due to the slow internet at the time and the size of the games, it became a thing to check various PC magazines like PC Format or PC Zone and their cover CDs to see if there was any new glide patches that they might have included. It was one of these CDs that I got the patch for Swift 3D, which we can tell from the box had no 3D support at launch. In looking at the readme that came with the patch, it seems it wasn't easy to do, and they had to get creative, but I'm happy that they did. As if we boot up the older Windows version, we can see a decent enough looking game. It's not the highest resolution, and there's not much in the way of options. We can either resize the window, as the resolution itself is locked, or we can tweak the detail, which doesn't have many stops, but boy did it scale all the way down. In-game, the draw distance wasn't amazing, and it just stopped at the black void. So let's compare this with the Glide version, which straight away is running at a much higher resolution. And most of the graphics options are now gone, with just one that allows us to enable or disable the hardware fog, which in-game gives it a much brighter look, but surprisingly doesn't really push the draw distance out. If anything, the fog actually hides bits that you might have been able to see before. The rest of the game is drawn at the highest detail settings, with texture smoothing enabled, and it just looks and runs really nice and smooth. It is the best way of playing this game. But with Wing Commander Prophecy, we can see a game that was designed for the card, as we can see the logo and text on the box. Now this game actually supported 3 different renderers: Software, Direct 3D and Glide, with Glide having the most options and effects of all 3. Though if the game detects that you've got a Voodoo, it won't let you pick DirectX at all. It's either Glide or Software. And with it running via 3D effects and having all the options enabled, the game looks stunning. Lots of particle effects, coloured lighting, and detailed models and backgrounds. At the time this was a seriously good looking game that played just as well, and with the 3D effects card it ran just as smoothly as well. It was awesome.
Disintegration would be too good for you. Death carries me.
The software version actually still looks quite nice, but as you can see everything has been knocked back, and while losing most of the effects doesn't hurt the game, the lower frame rate does, as it can really chug along when there's a lot of action on screen. Even though I can't show it, the DirectX version looked like a halfway house between Software and Glide. It ran faster and was more detailed, but it was missing some of the cooler graphical effects of the 3D effects card. These days there's a new updated OpenGL renderer that actually replicates all of the features of the Glide version, so that's the best way to play it on a modern machine. Now with the Pentium 200 that I have in this machine, I can pretty much brute force most software renderers to draw fast and smooth. But on a lower spec machine the difference between the software and Glide mode was much larger. But it's still easy to see it in some games that were designed with 3D cards in mind, like Unreal, which in software mode really does run like a slideshow, as we can see with the famous Castle Flyby demo. Even with all the CPU and RAM, this game struggles hard. But with the Voodoo one, it's not perfectly smooth, but it is much better and it's actually playable. And that's with some of the fancier effects enabled, like reflections. This was easily one of the best upgrades I ever bought, as it allowed me to play some of my favourite games. We're talking Half-Life and the amazing Battlezone 98, all while running a Pentium 133. So if you remember getting glide patches, or you had your favourite game that used this card, I'd love to hear about it. So until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was Click Clack, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can let me know down in the comments, or you can use those buttons just below. You know the ones I mean. Or if you're not sure yet, then you can check out 2 other videos that I've done that are on the screen right now. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.